High humidity is not just uncomfortable, it is actively rotting wood, feeding mold behind walls, and making air feel 10 degrees hotter than it actually is. There is a $4 mineral that pulls moisture directly out of the air without a dehumidifier, without electricity, and without any ongoing cost once you have set it up. That mineral is calcium chloride, and it has been used to pull moisture out of enclosed spaces for well over a century in everything from shipping containers, protecting machinery in transit, to walk-in food storage facilities, keeping grain and dried goods dry over winter. It is sold in hardware stores and home improvement stores as a damp remover or moisture absorber product, sometimes under brand names you may already recognize. But the active ingredient in virtually all of them is the same thing: calcium chloride. Here is what makes it work. Calcium chloride is what chemists call a hygroscopic compound, which is a term that means it actively attracts and holds water molecules from the surrounding air rather than just passively absorbing moisture when it touches it. When you place it in an enclosed or semi-enclosed space, it begins drawing moisture out of the air around it almost immediately and holding it in a liquid solution that collects below the crystals. Unlike silica gel packets, which you find in shoeboxes and vitamin bottles, and which absorb a relatively small amount of moisture before becoming saturated, calcium chloride can absorb many times its own weight in water before it needs to be replaced, which is why it is the compound used in industrial and agricultural settings where serious moisture removal is needed over extended periods. So what does this actually look like in practice? The simplest setup costs almost nothing beyond the $4 container of the material itself. Take a clean plastic container with no lid, something like an empty yogurt tub, a large takeout container, or any container roughly the size of a coffee can, and punch or drill a series of small holes in the bottom of it. Fill this container about halfway with calcium chloride crystals, then set it inside a second container with no holes that is slightly larger. The calcium chloride pulls moisture from the air, which collects as liquid and drips through the holes in the inner container into the outer container below. Every few weeks or as needed, pour out the collected liquid, which is essentially a very dilute calcium chloride solution, and refill the inner container with fresh crystals when they have dissolved down. That is the entire system. The spaces where this works best are enclosed or semi-enclosed areas with limited air exchange, since the drier the space gets, the faster calcium chloride does its job, and open areas where humid outdoor air is constantly flowing in will require more material to keep up. Closets, bathrooms without exhaust fans, basements, crawl spaces, laundry rooms, spare bedrooms that stay shut, and storage areas are the ideal candidates. A single setup using about a pound of calcium chloride can handle a space of roughly 100 to 200 square feet in a moderately humid environment. For a very humid space, multiple setups placed at different spots around the room work better than one large central one, since moisture is drawn from the air nearest to the material first. One thing that is worth understanding about humidity and how it actually affects comfort, because this changes how you think about where to place these setups. The way humans experience temperature is not determined solely by the actual air temperature. It is heavily influenced by how efficiently our bodies can cool themselves through sweat evaporation. In low humidity air, sweat evaporates quickly and carries heat away from the body effectively, which is why dry heat at 90 degrees can feel manageable, while humid heat at 85 degrees feels suffocating. High humidity reduces the rate at which sweat can evaporate, which is why high humidity air feels so much hotter than it actually is. Reducing humidity in a room does not lower the air temperature on a thermometer, but it makes the room feel meaningfully cooler, often by several degrees in terms of perceived comfort, without any mechanical cooling involved at all. This is also why the combination of the passive cooling method from the previous video and this humidity control setup work particularly well together. Cross ventilation brings in moving air, which helps sweat evaporate faster. Lower humidity from the calcium chloride setup reduces the moisture content of that air further. The two effects stack on each other, and together they produce a noticeably more comfortable room without a dehumidifier, without an air conditioner, and without an electricity bill attached to either of them. Now let us address the forever part of the title, because that word deserves a direct and honest explanation. Calcium chloride itself does not last forever without any maintenance. As it absorbs moisture, the crystals eventually dissolve into liquid and need to be replenished. How long this takes depends on how humid the environment is and how much air the setup is exposed to. In a moderately humid closed space like a spare bedroom, a half-pound of calcium chloride might last anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks before needing to be topped up. The forever element is the setup itself, rather than the material inside it. The container system you build once, place once, and then maintain indefinitely with a few dollars worth of refill material every month or two. Over the course of a year, the total cost of running one of these setups is comparable to or less than a single commercial dehumidifier tablet purchase, and the hardware around it never wears out. A practical comparison is worth making here, since a lot of people have already tried the small commercial damp absorber products sold in hardware stores and found them underwhelming. Those products typically use calcium chloride in small quantities inside a sealed plastic housing with a collection tray below, and they work on the same principle as the DIY setup described here. The difference is purely one of scale and cost efficiency. A standard commercial product often contains around 10 ounces of calcium chloride and costs $8 to $12. A pound of raw calcium chloride crystals, which gives you more material than 2 of those commercial products, costs $3 to $5 at most hardware stores and many online retailers. You are buying the same compound, doing the same job, for a fraction of the price, and the collection capacity of the DIY setup scales to whatever container size you need, rather than being locked into a fixed housing. There is a safety note worth including here. Calcium chloride is a salt compound, and is generally considered safe for household use, but the liquid that collects below the crystals is a concentrated solution and should be handled with care. It is mildly irritating to skin with prolonged contact, so rinsing it down a drain with plenty of water is the appropriate disposal method rather than leaving it sitting on surfaces. Keep the setup out of reach of children and pets for the same reason. The crystals themselves should also not be placed where children or pets could get into them, since consuming a significant amount of any concentrated salt compound can cause issues. It is worth being specific about why high humidity causes so many problems beyond just discomfort, because understanding the mechanism makes it easier to decide which rooms to prioritize. Mold does not grow in dry air. Most mold species require a relative humidity above roughly 60% sustained over time before they can establish themselves on a surface. Below that threshold, mold spores that land on walls and ceilings simply remain dormant. This is why the same bathroom wall can stay clean for years in a dry climate and develop mold within months in a humid one, even with identical cleaning habits. Wood rot operates on a similar principle. The fungi responsible for wood rot also require moisture content in the wood itself to be elevated beyond what dry air allows, which is why old timber-framed farmhouses that stayed consistently dry lasted for well over a century, while modern framing exposed to persistent moisture problems can begin to deteriorate in a fraction of that time. Controlling humidity in enclosed spaces is not just about comfort. It is one of the most direct things a homeowner can do to protect the structure of the building itself. Farmhouses, barns, root cellars, and grain storage buildings used variations of this approach for generations before electric dehumidifiers existed, partly through calcium chloride and partly through other hygroscopic materials like quicklime, rock salt, and specific types of clay that were packed into storage areas to keep them dry enough to preserve what was stored there. If you set this up this week, check it after about 10 days to see how much liquid has collected in the outer container, since this gives you a rough sense of how much moisture your particular space is putting into the air, and how frequently you will need to top it up. And if the humidity problem in your home is concentrated specifically in the bathroom or laundry room rather than general living spaces, there is a second zero-cost fix involving ventilation timing that makes a significant difference in those specific rooms, which is exactly what the next video covers. Stay subscribed for that one. Let me know in the comments which room in your home has the worst humidity problem, because that actually changes the best approach, and the answers will shape what gets covered in future videos.